Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here from the Locked On Big 12 podcast. We have just got the NCAA Tournament bracket for the year 2022. Emory Lyda of Locked On Texas Tech joins me. We're going to break down the whole bracket, especially for the 6 Big 12 teams that are in the NCAA Tournament this year. But first, quick word from our sponsors. Today's show brought to you by Run Your Pool. If you guys want to run your pool, the best place to do it is runyourpool.com/lockedon, promo code Pure Madness. All right, Emory, let's play this intro video so we can break down the bracket.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here once again, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us tonight for a crossover, it is Emory Lyda. Emory, how are you? How happy are you that we have a bracket here?
Well, I'm very happy to finally get all of this over with, all the seeding talk, all of the who's on the bubble, who's in and out. Is Tech going to get a 2 seed? All of that discussion is gone now. We can just look at the bracket, and in a few days, we'll have games to play. So it's really the best time of year for me as a college basketball fan, and I'm delighted to actually be able to have this all over with, not have to sweat it out on Selection Sunday, and now get ready for some basketball.
Yeah, and really the big thing for the Big 12 Conference, 6 teams get in, no Oklahoma, which their run kind of ended there. They got that win over Tech. It's a completely different conversation, but Tech holds on to get the win there. So nobody really was sweating it out. It ended up being Iowa State, honestly, got the closest to the bubble. They were pretty safe, though. That 11 seed was pretty safe. The big story is that 2 Big 12 teams get the 1 seeds. Let's start there. I know you text Tech guy, but let's start with that, right? Kansas, we knew was going to be a 1 seed, right? They get the 1 seed in the Midwest region. And so here it is. Show you guys that. The 1 seed in the Midwest. Baylor, on the other hand, we thought maybe had to sweat it out, but the big help for them was Kentucky and Auburn losing in the SEC tournament and really not making any claim. Purdue also got it getting bounced there in the Big Ten championship, although they would have had some kind of ground to cover. Duke did not win the ACC championship, so a lot of these schools that were threatening on the 1 line or threatening to make the 1 line didn't get it, and that's what Baylor allowed Baylor to have that first round exit and still get a 1 seed.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is really on the 2 and the 3 line, there were a lot of teams that lost early in the tournament. I mean, you look at a team like Purdue obviously lost in the final, but then you had teams like Wisconsin were kind of on the real fringes. You had other teams, Kentucky and Auburn, obviously come to mind, losing early in the SEC tournament. And the way it worked out is it really was nothing really gained or lost from the conference tournament when it came to the 1 seed battle, because all of the teams that won their conference tournament, think of like a Villanova or a Tennessee, were so far back coming into the tournament that they weren't really going to have any shot at reaching up and getting out of that 1 line. And I really think that what Baylor did in the last 2.5 weeks of the regular season kind of set themselves up to where they didn't, if everything stalemated in the conference tournament. So if they won the conference tournament or if everyone lost early, which is what ended up happening, they put themselves in that position to be able to sort of withstand a draw more or less. And so that's kind of what happened. And just the way that the bracket worked out, it ended up being that Kentucky and Auburn losing kind of sealed their fate when it came to the 1 seed, especially because both of those teams came into the SEC tournament knowing that a loss there probably would have done slightly more damage than a loss to Oklahoma for Baylor. And obviously, Texas A&M ended up almost getting in the tournament by the work that they did in the tournament. But just in general, like this was a kind of a dream scenario for Baylor in a sense, because they didn't really have to expend a whole lot of energy in the Big 12 tournament, and just the chaos that happened around them allowed them to keep hold of that 1 seed.
Well, and the good thing for them is, I thought about this, and I'd mentioned this on Twitter. I was joking. It was like Scott Drew's a genius. They didn't want to endure a 3-game weekend for them with 7 players is not. It's not user friendly. You know what I mean? It's not what Baylor wants to have. So to me, things really did go Scott Drew and Baylor's way. Let's just hit on this bubble conversation really fast. So the teams that end up getting in, I thought one of Michigan or Rutgers was going to get the chop, was going to get bounced. I was surprised to see that Michigan's not in a play-in game and Indiana is. Were you surprised by that also?
Yeah, I was. I think way too much stock is being put into Michigan's strength of schedule. And I know that sounds kind of like a harsh statement, but the reality is they really didn't have the type of wins that you would say in Oklahoma had. And you look at the fact that a lot of their losses, yeah, they lost to a bunch of quad one teams, but at the same time, like this is also a team that got blown out in a lot of those games. They don't really have the statement wins on their resume to justify just being in through a difficult strength of schedule. And I thought Indiana as a whole, obviously they had the head-to-head win in the conference tournament. They had multiple wins on the run, and really, I mean, like you look at Indiana, it's not a particularly strong resume. I think the Big Ten in general maybe got a little bit overvalued by the committee, but I certainly thought Indiana deserved to be higher up, and I'm shocked that Michigan made the tournament and didn't have to go through a play-in game. I feel like out of all the things in the bracket, that was probably the one biggest surprise that I had was just that Michigan ended up basically they weren't even one of the last 5 teams in if you take a look at it. Like, obviously, you had the last 4 in, and then I believe you had, I think Iowa
Notre Dame
State
and Rutgers are in that play-in game, and then I forget the other
it's
play-in.
Wyoming and Indiana,
Wyoming,
and they
Indiana.
were
Yes, Wyoming, Indiana. And it's like they weren't. Yeah, they weren't there. They weren't.
yeah,
You know,
they were, like as far as I know, they weren't even on the bubble. Like, they at least they weren't in a position to where a win from a couple more bid thieves would have taken their spot. It was pretty comfortable, which means that more or less, their tournament hopes were sealed coming into this week. Like, the loss to Indiana didn't do anything, and that's just shocking to me.
the other team we're all surprised about was A&M. And look, the argument can be, Emory, that A&M had way too much work to do coming into the week, right? But, they get the wins in the tournament over Florida in overtime, then Auburn, number 4 in the country, then Arkansas. They had a win. They had a massive win streak. I think they ran it up to 7 or 8 there towards the back end. But it features wins at Alabama, over Florida neutral site overtime, over Auburn neutral site, over Arkansas, and an ass whipping. Like, sure, they had a lot of work to do late, but I mean, they kind of got it done in a way that Michigan didn't. So, like you're saying, I get the strength of schedule is a lot. Is for Michigan, it's harder, but A&M did make the most of their opportunities later on. I know they came up short today, but like that, that happens sometimes for teams having to make that kind of run. So, I think there is a case both ways. You know, clearly the case was not Michigan versus A&M, right? Yeah, that actually was not something that we see with a bracket. That was not talked about, but that's where I would have maybe made a flip. Not Indiana, that's not where I would have made the flip there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm firmly on the side that I don't think A&M should have made the tournament. I think you look at a team, and yes, they made the conference tournament final, and it was an incredible run from Buzz Williams' team. But you look at the losses they had. They lost to Vanderbilt on the road. They had a stretch of 8 straight losses in conference play. Like, the amount of teams that have done that in a conference that wasn't even that great throughout the season and managed to make the tournament, it's really a short list. And like you look at their wins, and sure, like, what they did in Tampa was really incredible. I mean, you win against Auburn, you win against one of the hottest teams in the nation in Arkansas. That looks great, but it just doesn't overcome the fact that for most of the season, they weren't even really on the bubble in the back half of conference play. And, like, it goes to show the committee really doesn't value the conference tournament as much as some people like to think. And I mean, is that an issue? Well, I think that that's up for discussion. But at the end of the day, like, A&M just had so much to overcome. I was surprised. Like, I think if we're gonna go off of the big wins, maybe bad losses, I thought Dayton probably would have been ahead of A&M, and I think that you saw that on their final bracket, that Dayton ended up as the first team out. And I'm not saying that I would have had Dayton, and I think the biggest thing for me is I would have had Oklahoma over Michigan, but because I think that they
Great
were
point, because the number of good wins. I think you're sorry to cut you off, but like if you're comparing the resumes, Oklahoma racked up some seriously good wins. I
yeah,
mean, even in non-conference, they got Arkansas right
Arkansas.
in the non-conference. I forgot who else they got, but I mean they were racking them up there, for the most part.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, I feel like you could compare Michigan and Oklahoma's resumes because 'cause they're similar in the sense that both had a lot of Q1 losses, really tough strength of schedule, but Oklahoma just had, like you look at their top end wins, I mean, they beat Arkansas, they beat Texas Tech, they beat Baylor. Like, find another bubble team with 3 wins that good. You're probably not gonna find it. And it's really difficult to look at them objectively and say that, like, they didn't deserve to be in over Michigan, but, I mean, it is what it is. It's like, I could understand the value for having, like, a Dayton and over them. It's just having a Michigan over them is kinda confusing to me.
Yeah, they racked up 5 top 15 wins. I mean,
That's
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 a
absurd for a bubble team.
for bubble team, right? And it's not like their losses were bad. So the Utah State loss isn't great. The Butler loss in overtime, not great either. But Butler ended up being actually a pretty decent team. And then obviously any loss in the Big 12 really isn't going to hurt you that much. And they didn't do a whole lot of losing to the bottom half. I mean, I'm looking right now, there is a loss to at TCU is not great, but or they got swept by TCU. So, I mean, maybe that hurts about TCU's tournament team. Um, all of their all of their losses in conference were to tournament teams, believe
Yeah.
it or not. So, Utah State and Butler, it's fine. But like if you're on that stretch where you had 2 losses all year to non-tournament teams, you rack up five top 15 wins at the time, I should say. Top 15 wins. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is Oklahoma's pure pound for pound resume. Their amount of really good wins. I mean, Michigan, Notre Dame as well as another team that comes to mind. I believe they only had 4 combined Q1 and Q2 wins.
Right.
And so for them to make the tournament, I mean, they essentially have the resume that a Carolina had before like 2 weeks ago, and everyone thought UNC was on the other side of the bubble. So for Notre Dame to make it pretty much, I mean, yeah, they were in the last 4 in, but them being on the bubble was a little bit sketchy, and I feel like they really benefited from just having a really weak conference that they had to go through. So I just think the Big 12 got undervalued just a little bit, and both in terms of seeding and in the fact that Oklahoma didn't get in.
All right, let's do a quick word from our sponsors here, and then we'll get into where the Big 12 teams sit. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Run Your Pool. March Madness is now, and that means you need to start thinking about how you're going to be running your brackets. It's almost too late, but it's not too late to go to runyourpool.com. They have Survivor, and Pick X, which are different ways to run your bracket. They offer more intel to make your picks than what you'll find at ESPN or CBS. You guys can go to runyourpool.com/locked on. That's runyourpool.com/locked on. Enter Pure Madness. That's PUREMADNESS at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details were there as well. Runyourpool.com/locked on. You can go there for a chance to win a cash prize up to $1,800. We look forward to seeing you there. Also, today's show is brought to you by our friends at Stat Heroes. Stat Heroes NCAA single game pick'em pits the stars against star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage. Start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that does not rely on big spreads, long odds, and funky props. Stat Hero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was meant to be. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/locked on. Use promo code locked on as well for a 100% match. Terms and conditions apply. Emory, I'm not sure you just saw, Tom Brady's coming back. So shout out to Tom Brady for doing this in the middle of the middle of the bracket reveal. So there you go. Tom Brady back. Not Big 12 related,
Hold
but
on.
Tom just wanted to hog the spotlight. Unbelievable stuff. We'll see Coach K back next year, I guess, at this pace, right? That's kind of what we're going for. All right. So the first region we saw, Emory, was the West, right? This is Gonzaga's region, as you know, some of the clips I found did not fully show up. So there you go. Still see it right there. This is Gonzaga's region. All right. This is where Texas Tech ends up as the 3 seed. This is a really difficult region because look at the top seed. Not all the games are great first round, but Gonzaga, UConn, Arkansas, Alabama, Tech, Michigan State, and Duke. I mean, this is some stiff competition here. How did you feel about Texas Tech's draw when you saw it? And what do you think their chances are of getting out of that first weekend? Because it's going to be an uphill climb.
Well, the first 2 matchups, I'm not really
Oh, really?
compared to where Tech could have ended up. I feel like drawing Alabama and Rutgers or Notre Dame, and then obviously Montana State. I think about of all the potential 14 seeds, like, I was worried a team like Chattanooga or New Mexico State could have potentially slipped that far down. So to avoid that tier of team is nice in the first matchup. And then in the second matchup, I mean, Alabama's a team that's lost 3 in a row coming into the tournament, and certainly they've had the highest of all highs. They've beaten Alabama, or they've beaten Baylor and Gonzaga on neutral courts and at home this season, but they've also suffered bad losses. And I think that if you're looking at a type of team that Tech has done well against, it's a team that doesn't shoot the ball particularly well from deep and can be prone to turnovers. And Alabama's both of those. So I think in terms of the first weekend, this is about as good of a draw as you could have gotten for Tech. Rutgers is another team that has those top end wins and certainly has the potential to go to spring an upset. But at the same time, like if you're looking on the 11 line, the only other team that I think I would have rather had outside of an Iowa State, which is impossible to play, would have been Michigan. And like, I mean, I think you have to look at it like all the 6 seeds this year for the most part were on a pretty dangerous line. Like, I mean, you look at teams like Iowa, which ended up on the 5 after today. Obviously, you had teams that were around that sort of mark, like a Murray State or like a USC. I mean, all of the teams in general that were towards the 6 line were pretty dangerous. And I think, I mean, Alabama has the top end potential. I mean, we've seen that throughout the year, but to be able to sort of get a team that's been struggling as of late and also I feel like matches up decently well against Tech. I mean, we've seen Nate Oates in the tournament 3 years ago against Buffalo, and that was a pretty easy win when Tech, I believe, was only favored by like 2 in that game. So, like, the trends point towards this being a pretty good draw for Tech.
Was that the team that beat the hell out of Arizona?
No, that was the year before. The year
Okay.
after they drew Tech in the second round as a 6 seed.
So what's interesting here, like, if Tech were able to run the table, they get a matchup with, all the way to the finals, they'd end up, that's the wrong thing to put up. If they ran all the way to the final there, they would play Gonzaga in a rematch. And, seeing that just made me think about like how different of a team Tech is now than when they were and they played Gonzaga, right? And you think about Gonzaga, like how different are they from that first time? And I know this gets brought up all the time, but like I think there is some truth to this. They haven't been through that grinder, right? And look, they took a loss. I think it was 1 or 2 losses in conference. I'm not
St.
even sure.
Mary's was the only loss.
Yeah, St. Mary's the only loss they took. But like Tech is a drastically different ball club. Gonzaga is awesome. They're really freaking good. But I mean, this team does feel gettable the same way last year's team felt gettable. Now, the conversation of which team's better, like throw that out. This Gonzaga team should be the number 1 overall seed, but they are gettable. They're definitely gettable, and Tech it's a different beast than the first time they played them.
Yeah. I mean, the first game, you didn't have TJ Shannon. He was out with a back injury. Malik Wilson was out with a foot injury. And you were still trying to figure out kind of how to make the 2 big system work. I mean, Bryson Williams had a real cold streak going into that game. And I believe he, at the time, was shooting at 4 of 28 over his first 3 games against power conferences. It was like 6 of 28 or something along those lines. And like Tech offensively figured a lot out in the 3 or 4 week stretch that followed that Gonzaga game. I mean, you look at once TJ went out, it took them a couple of games to really figure out what to do from a ball handling standpoint. And then once they got that down, I mean, the win over Kansas, the win over Baylor, and kind of the stretch they had where they beat Oklahoma State as well, that 3-game stretch came really only a couple of games after the Gonzaga match. And since then, I mean, offensively, I feel like you've been in a good rhythm. You figured out how to kind of figure out the ball handling situation. Obviously, Adonis Arms is really coming to his own through conference play. Defensively, I feel like as you're getting pieces back healthy, I mean, Malik Wilson and Terrence Shannon are 2 of the best off-ball defenders that you're going to have. And Tech just got killed from the 3-point line in that game. And I think a lot of it has to do with the rotations just weren't quite as quick. And you bring back a TJ and you bring back Malik, and those are two guys that are really going to help that. So I feel like this is a fully healthy Tech team. And certainly I don't want to make it seem like Gonzaga is any sort of pushover because they aren't. It's going to be a difficult matchup regardless, but I don't think the first game really told us a ton about how they would match up in a tournament setting just because Tech was missing 2 key pieces and you were still trying to figure out the rotation that early in the season.
All right, so we've covered Tech now. Also, I will mention this. They set up Izzo versus Coach K in the second round, which is brilliant. We had talked last week. Ironically, I had said last week, I was like, I respect how Tom Brady retired more than Coach K. Well, I guess that looks dumb now. So really dumb of me to say that. But I mean, I love the idea of potentially the second round. Let me see if I can make sure I pull that up. It is the West number 2 of Coach K against Izzo second round. I think I'm digging that.
I think Davidson's going to beat Michigan State first
Oh,
round.
come on now. You saw how they
That-
looked today? They crapped the bed today against
I'm
Richmond.
I'm just
Richmond
saying.
pushed them around a little bit late in that game, though. They got pushed around.
Well, Richmond is literally a team that is full of like old men that are like 30,
Grown ass men. That is true. That is
and
very true. They're all like
I'm
30, yes.
and I'm just saying, like, having watched Michigan State down the stretch, like, sure, they have good pieces, but this is not a typical Tom Izzo team. And I mean, I'm just saying Davidson's shooting should scare anyone. Like they're a team where if their shot is going down, if you've got Hyunjung Lee and Foster Moreau able to hit those shots, or Foster Willer, excuse me, able to hit those shots from three and they're shooting
Also, isn't he a
40.
Michigan State transfer? I believe he is, isn't
Yeah,
he?
he is a Michigan State
Yeah,
transfer.
the
And
Foster Loyer revenge game. Love that.
yeah, you got that too factoring in. Like, I mean, I like Davidson in that matchup, but I mean, even if Michigan State wins, I feel like it's a good matchup on either count against Duke because, like, I mean, Duke has been kind of reeling as of late, and those teams that are able to stretch the perimeter, I mean, look at what Virginia Tech did to them just last night, and
They
look
said,
at what
Mark Williams, come on out here. Let's see what you got. And
yeah,
it was not pretty.
put them in the pick and roll, force them to choose between drop coverage or putting Mark Williams on the perimeter and just cook. I mean, as simple as that.
So you feel pretty good about Tech. I do think Tech would give some problems. Also, Bryson Williams is like the matchup nightmare, right? That's
Yeah.
like because Keve Aluma, he's a very good interior player, but like he's somebody they do pull towards the perimeter very often, and he's a
Yeah.
pretty good passing big. Like you said, they put him in a lot of pick and roll situations away from the basket, get him moving around. That was a big key for them in that game. Bryson Williams kind of fits that bill, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think both Bryson Williams and Kevin O'Banner, we've seen them used a lot at and as screeners and as perimeter players. And like, I mean, I think in terms of the defensive pressure as well, Duke is a team that doesn't really have a true primary ball handler. I mean, you've got Wendell Moore who's done a good job of that this season, but you've got guys like Jeremy Roach and Trevor Keels who've been a little bit questionable from that sense. And Tech is a team that loves to put pressure on perimeter guards. And a team that doesn't have a true primary ball handler is a team that I think can struggle against a team like Tech. And so I think on the defensive end, this is a really good matchup for Tech if they get that far and get to face Duke because like pretty much every check marker of a team that would struggle against Tech is something that Duke fits. I mean, they're a team that has a true big, they're a team that struggles to shoot at times, and they're a team that doesn't really have a true ball handler.
And also, Mark Adams is a lot better coach than Coach K is right now. Just everybody know that. All right, so the other Big 12 teams got to start with Kansas. That's the number 2 Midwest region. We want the number 1. Here it is. The Jayhawks, number 1 Midwest. You know, the team I'm worried about the most, and you look right there down the line. We'll go Midwest number 2 right here. The second part of this, like it's Iowa. Iowa is the team that is the most scary for Kansas because they will I guess try to pull Dave McCormick away from the basket, but they're just red hot right now, and they've got a guy that can not only just match Ochai Agbaji but definitely outplay him because Keegan Murray is on fire right now. Now, granted, I'm not sure that, it's going to be a whole new ball game when we play good defensive teams, right? This is the big decider for these Big Ten teams because I think as good as we think that league is, like the defensive level that we're seeing in the Big Ten, not as high, nowhere near, not as high as we normally
Not
think,
even
like,
close.
not even close to Big 12. Like this is
Yeah.
a whole different, and also this is a reason why Fran Fraschilla thinks every single game is hand-to-hand combat. It's because the referees, like they let these dudes sort it out in the Big 12, right? They let you fight a little bit in the post.
Yeah. I mean, look, Iowa and Purdue, you look at that game today, those are two teams that are outside of the top 70 in adjusted defense. Nobody in the Big 12 is that low defensively. And like, I mean, Kansas is a team that I really like the efficiency that their offense has been operating with the last few games. I think that their ball movement, especially with Remy Martin starting to get things figured out, that's going to be one of the things that is really really key to watching this one. But I mean, I'm skeptical of Iowa. I think you've got Keegan Murray, which is obviously, I mean, one of the best players in the nation. You've got a team full of shooters around him. But at the same time, this is a team that defensively has struggled throughout the year. certainly they've caught fire at the end of the season. But again, like they almost lost to Indiana yesterday. That's a bubble team, a team that really isn't that good from a metric standpoint. They've generally been in close games, and yeah, they had the headliner against Northwestern where they put up like 100, what was it, 114 points, something like that. But like, I mean, for me, a team like Iowa scares me less for a Kansas squad than a team that I feel like would be really good on the defensive end. And I feel like they kind of lucked out in that sense in this region. Like outside of San Diego State, who I don't think has the offense to really be able to sort of win that sort of matchup, they really don't have anyone until they get into the Elite Eight and have to face a team like possibly a Wisconsin or LSU. Like those are the only two teams in the region from a defense
When
standpoint.
LSU just fired their coach too.
Yeah, so
Like,
they're kind of
I
they're
mean,
kinda gonna be facing an uphill battle without Will Wade, but,
right, like,
like,
I mean, I know they might be a more talented group than Iowa State, but, like, I'm not gonna pick LSU without Will Wade against TJ Otzelberger's Iowa State team. You say what you want about Iowa State getting their asses, whipped by Tech, but that's a whole different ballgame playing Texas Tech than playing. Now I know LSU is an awesome defensive team. That's one of those teams that's really good. But like, who do you think for Kansas is the biggest challenge? I still think it's Iowa, just because what we saw the last couple of days is like they can absorb really great games from big men. I mean, Trace Jackson Davis had like 33, I think it was, and like 12, and Iowa still won. So I think the plan might be to feed Dave McCormick early and often, and try to slow that game down. I know KU likes to run. I just think Iowa's kind of a good match because they can run, right? And KU wants to run, but they might be better off playing a slower style against Iowa.
yeah, I think it's gonna be a very high variance matchup, and that's assuming that Iowa gets that far because they're also
So do you think Richmond might? Do you think Richmond might get them? Is that
okay,
what?
I'm not gonna pick them to get them. I still
Okay.
think Iowa's gonna survive, but you're putting them in a region or in a quadrant or a pool of the first 2 games, like the first weekend, where you've got a Richmond team that seemingly has like all the seniority in their world and just faced a team that has a lot of spacing in Davidson. And then you've got another matchup in Providence and South Dakota State. One of them is a team that seemingly wins every single close game. They either win by 2 or lose by 30. And the other team is probably the best shooting team in the nation in South Dakota State. So like you have a complete quad there of complete unknowns. And like I mean any one of those 4 teams could make it to the Sweet 16 if things break right for them. And like I mean, I think Iowa certainly is red hot right now, but at the same time, they play a style of play that if they go cold, I mean, they rely so much on their offense and so much on their shooting that if they start going cold, then it could be a round 1 or a round 2 loss for them. But outside of Iowa, I think that probably the best matchup for the best team to go against Kansas in this region is going to be Auburn. And I mean, I don't even think that they match up that well against Kansas. I just think that really none of the other matchups really kind of intrigue me that much in terms of knocking off Kansas. Like I feel like you look at a Wisconsin, Johnny Davis might be hurt. You look at Iowa, like I said, I'm just not a huge fan of the amount of variance they have because of the style of play that they play. And then you look at a team like Providence, probably the weakest top 5 seed that we've seen in a while. Like there's just no one there that scares me outside of maybe Auburn if they can get things
Well,
figured out again.
if USC could pull one off and make a run, the interesting thing would be, remember, this essentially this well, not essentially the same. This USC team minus Evan Mobley is the same team that beat the
That's
hell
a
out of
pretty
Kansas.
big minus.
Yes, no, I know, but I mean, like, do you think those guys are afraid of KU? You know what I mean? Like, there's no fear of the jersey there. Now USC has been the 26 and 7 is a bit deceiving, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's not the strength schedule wasn't very hard, but yeah, I actually think this is it's a very good path for KU. I think
Yeah.
that's the way to put it. It's a very good path for KU. Let's take a look at Baylor, who I believe is in the East region. Let me find my East. Boom. There it is. All right. East region. Baylor and Norfolk State. Do not get Missouri, Baylor. That's all I'll say to you. So Carolina and Marquette, I think it's really fun, fascinating, 8-9. You look the rest of the way, like, okay, UCLA is scary because the pedigree, but also it's not like Baylor's lacking players who have been there before. Looking down the line, too, okay, Texas, no. We know that Baylor can beat them twice. Virginia Tech, not really. Purdue, maybe. That's difficult inside. Flo can't keep up with those guys. Kentucky, Sure, because I think there's such a well-rounded team. But I think this is a fun region. It's kind of an eclectic region. You know what I mean? This is a region. If we go back to this first one right here, Emory, like Carolina Marquette's probably about as traditional as you can get of a matchup. Then we have St. Mary's versus Wyoming or Indiana, with St. Mary's as the 5 seed here, so they've got the upper hand. UCLA Akron, sure, it's a classic 4-13, but then Tech and Virginia Tech, I mean, against Texas, weird matchup. Yale and Purdue, odd. Murray State versus San Francisco might be the weirdest 7-10 of all time. Like,
Yeah.
that's just bizarre. And then you obviously have Kentucky. So this is what I would call an eclectic region here for Baylor. And look, they're kind of an eclectic team from kind of where they come from to where they are now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of an unconventional region. You just look at all of the pieces that they have, and like obviously you've got UCLA who last year had the incredible run to the Final Four. I mean, and they've looked pretty good as of late. I thought last night against Arizona they looked like a team that could be a Final Four contender again. I mean, they've had their kind of lumps during conference play, but certainly the top end talent on this UCLA team is good enough to potentially make a run against Baylor. Certainly North Carolina and Marquette are two teams that have had their streaks this season where they've looked like really good teams, and certainly Shaka Smart and Marquette had the early Big East season streak where they really looked good and then kind of tapered off at the end of conference play. And then obviously North Carolina is coming off a big win over Duke at the end of the regular season. But I think at least until you get into the Sweet 16 and a potential matchup against UCLA, like I look at all of those, obviously Norfolk State should be something that Baylor takes care of. And then North Carolina, Marquette, I think both of those teams, Baylor has kind of the versatility to be able to take advantage of, especially with UNC if they win, and just being able to take advantage of the two big lineup that UNC runs. I mean, having both Manick and Baycott out there like they have for a lot of their minutes is something that we've seen Baylor exploit in conference play against other teams that run big. And I just think that's something that they can utilize. And then, I mean, looking at the bottom half of the region, like, I mean, you've got a Kentucky team that has looked very good at times this season. I mean, certainly they've probably got the most balanced roster in the NCAA, but certainly, like, I just think that this region in general is full of teams that play such different styles. Like, I mean, Purdue is really the absolute epitome of all offense, no defense at times. And then you potentially match them up against Texas in the second round. Like, you could have one team that wants it to be a 50-49 matchup and one that wants it to be 100-98. And I mean, I just look at it like Baylor and Kentucky are probably the two most well-rounded teams in this region and have shown to be consistent throughout the season. I honestly think, like, out of all the regions, this one seems like the most likely to end up just being pure chalk in a 1-2 matchup in the Elite Eight.
I'm with you on that one. I'm with you on that. One more word from our sponsors, and we'll wrap things up with looking at TCU. It's the one team that we have not hit on yet. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline and BetOnline.net. The NCAA tournament is here, folks. The best place to get in on the action is BetOnline and BetOnline.net. You get there today, check out all the odds, news, and scores. They got baseball odds, pro and college basketball odds, NHL, UFC, boxing, Vegas casino games, and more. Once again, BetOnline and BetOnline.net. It's where the game starts. All right, so the last place, let me see. I was so lucky, Emory. I randomly clicked on one of my graphics, and it was the one where TCU is. Poor TCU. The one key for them, Emory, I'd said this, was get off the 8-9 line. Get off of it. Do whatever you can, because while they're a good team, they're a classic 8-9 where they're not well equipped enough to beat a 1, right? So, like, let's just take UNC, for example. I could see a world in which UNC does beat Baylor. That's not a completely out of this world thing. You know, James Akinjo sucks. Adam Flagler has the 1 for 10 that he had, which is rare, but like has a 3 for 10 right against OU. James Akinjo is not some efficient scorer, so you know it's possible. Armando Baycott goes absolutely crazy. Brady Manick's hitting threes, you know, and also the guards for UNC are shooting well too, which it's happened this year. TCU is not like there's no Armando Baycott, right? Eddie Lampkin's nice player. They've got some good players, right? You know, O'Bannon's good. I'm a huge Mike Miles guy. I love Mike Miles. He's the one guy who kind of could beat that Tech defense, the Texas Tech defense, because just kind of a good matchup, right? He's a good guy who can shoot over top of defenses and get to the spots that he wants and make tough shots. They are going to get their asses kicked by Arizona. I think if they win that first round game, I think Arizona might give them the business. So let me see if I can find my South again. There it is. So Seton Hall also tough matchup too to start off with, even if they even get by Seton Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I like the matchup with TCU against Seton Hall, and I think that might just be me being biased against the Big East teams this season. But like, I mean, I agree with what you said. I think drawing Arizona in the second round potentially is a nightmare draw. Like, Arizona's again one of the more balanced teams in the nation. I think their TCU is going to really struggle to guard a guy like Benedict Mathurin, and certainly, like out of all the teams that I look at in this tournament, Arizona seems like the most well equipped to avoid an upset. I'm not saying that they're going to be the favorite to win the national championship per se, but they play a style of basketball that has been very difficult to upset the season because they don't really rely on any one thing. They've got dependable shooting from deep. They're good at getting to the basket. Certainly, they play good team defense. And like you look at a team like TCU and the teams that they've been able to upset, like a Kansas or a Texas Tech, they've relied on Tech, for example, getting really cold and turning the ball over a bunch in the second half, or in Kansas's case, a rough night from Agbaji from three. And like you just can't, you don't really have that sort of lifeline with Arizona. And I mean, this is a good TCU team. I think if you had matched them against any of the teams on the 2 line, or even, I mean, if they could have ran it back against a Kansas or a Baylor, which obviously you can't as an 8 or 9, but like if they could have had that matchup, I think they would have been in better shape. But just the way that
Well,
they
Emory,
drew,
that's why we were saying it was so important for them to get off that
yeah,
8-9 line, right? Because if KU and Baylor are the one seeds, it's not like you get another crack at them.
yeah, that I mean, that's just a product of having to play in a conference that has 2 number 1 seeds is when you get to the 8 and 9 line, you're kinda stuck there because you're gonna be faced against the other 2 best teams in the nation, and, like, there's no way to get a weaker 1 seed or even a 2 seed, and, like, for TCU, I mean, I almost wonder if it would have been better for them to drop the conference tournament matchup against Texas and possibly get matched
End
up
up
with
to
a team.
10.
Yeah, because, like, because you look at the 7-10 matchups and, like, none of the teams there are particularly great. Like, I mean, you look at a Miami USC matchup, you look at obviously, San Francisco Murray State. Like, in general, those matchups throughout the bracket are not as contested as as the 8 or 9. I mean, even like you mentioned, Ohio State, Loyola, Chicago, like Ohio State's a team that's been slumping as of late. And it just seems like TCU got a really rough draw with this one, just having to potentially face off against Arizona on the 1 line. And they got a team in Seton Hall, which like kind of unspectacular, but at the same time, like they're not a team that's been fading as of late. They've had some solid wins this season. Obviously, you've got Kevin Willard, who's a good coach, and like this is not a region where I feel like TCU can make it far, unfortunately, which sucks because like they ended the season really as hot as we've seen them all year. And so it sucks to see them kind of get such a poor draw.
Yeah, I feel like at best they give Arizona like an 8-10 point game. Because I mean, I watched Arizona last night, and so I was on UCLA. I thought, hey, they're starting to play well right now. And at the end of that game, every shot UCLA was on a nice little run there at the end, but number one, every shot was so difficult that they hit. Every shot, I mean, they were making Jaquez work, they're making Tyler Campbell work, and Jules Bernard and Juzang all were having to work there. And they were answering every time. Every single time they had an answer. And it was different. And they didn't have Kirk Risa either. So, like,
Yeah.
also, I feel like Arizona is the team outside of the Big 12 that might be like the best Big 12 team, if that makes sense. Just because the way you mentioned it, the team defense. And they're like Kansas in the sense that they want to turn you over so they can run, right? They want to get out in transition and run. And I feel like that's why, I'm not sure why I have like this internal bias against Arizona, but like this year, it's going to be pretty hard to deny them, I think, especially if Creasa comes back.
Yeah. I mean, you want to talk about a team that I feel like might be the most Big 12 team outside of the Big 12. I would say it's Houston, but Arizona's not that far behind. I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
look,
Well,
yeah,
ironically, Houston, going to be
yeah.
part of the Big 12 here pretty
That
soon. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Arizona is just a team that's been on fire. And in fairness to UCLA, they tend to make their offense look like it's really difficult when they don't need to sometimes. But I mean, this Arizona defense, it's really good. And this Arizona team in general, like the one sort of question mark I have with them is sort of similar to with Gonzaga, where you're playing a bunch of teams in the Pac-12 that haven't been all that great this year. I mean, the league in general, you've got Arizona, you've got UCLA, you've got USC, but it falls off pretty quick. And so, like, that's the one concern is how are they going to do in a 6-game schedule where probably the last 4 are going to be as good as any team they faced all season. But this Arizona team's legit. And I mean, TCU, I mean, I think they can win against Seton Hall. I think they might even be slightly favored in that one, but going against Arizona is just a death wish for them.
We love you, TCU, and I'm with you too. It's like Jamie Dixon did such a good job at the end of the season to kind of get the thing back on track because it was, they were showing up on that last 4 buys, last 4 in for people, right?
Yeah.
And then they had that really difficult stretch of games in the end, and they were winning the big ones.
They got it done.
And the one they lost in too, I know they lost the West Virginia game in the end. You had to throw out that. That loss might have been the one that put them in the 8-9 section. But like that was after a run of games they played Tech and KU back to back in such a short period of time.
3 games in 5 days. Like
right.
that.
And,
for them to go
they were not going to win that game against West Virginia. This was not going to happen.
Yeah, for them to go 2-1 in that stretch, and the one they lost went all the way down to the wire in Allen Fieldhouse, like that showed me more about TCU. Like I was a little bit skeptical in the mid part of the conference season of them being able to pull off a good result, but certainly like what they did in that 3-game stretch. I mean, you've got to respect Jamie Dixon on that one, and it just sucks. And I mean, in some ways, I guess college basketball, you can always say, well, you should have done better early on in the season, but to be on the 8-9 line and not have the rewards from that sort of run and not be able to potentially advance into the Sweet 16 or not get the opportunity to really face off against teams that might not be quite as great. It's unfortunate because I truly think Arizona is probably the most difficult team you're going to have to match up with in the round of 32. And I say that because I think Gonzaga still might be the slightly better team, but they also play a style of basketball where if things aren't going well for them inside and they can't get the interior offense going, there's a situation where they go cold, like they did against St. Mary's. Arizona just has so many different weapons and so many different styles of play they can go to that it just doesn't seem like they're as prone to an upset as a team like Gonzaga.
Yeah, I mean with Koloko and Tabellis and Creasa and obviously Ben Mathurin, I mean they've got a lot of good players in that team. I mean, I would almost rather be Iowa State, right? I'd definitely rather be Iowa State, not almost. Iowa State in the 11-6 matchup with the coach. Iowa State out of everybody feels like they've been gifted the best situation. I think I have. See, I might have accidentally deleted there. Oh, there it is. Like you get Iowa, you get LSU. Now, look, Wisconsin's going to be a tough matchup, but the one thing about Wisconsin games, and this is the same thing for a lot of teams that play such a slow pace, is that the games are usually closer because it's so low scoring. And that's actually kind of how Iowa State likes it. So, is there a world where Brockington just goes absolutely nuts and they win and they go to Sweet 16? I'm definitely not counting it out. Want to ask you though, do you think we're setting up for a spot where it's like the Big 12 was like, you guys forgot we're the best conference in college basketball? Because I kind of feel like the Big 10 is in some look. The Big 10, is there a chance that Ohio State, gets the work from Loyola Chicago? I don't think so, right? But I mean, we saw Indiana or Illinois get it last year. You know what I mean? It's like it's not out of the realm of possibility. So, what do you think? I mean, because I think the Big 10 obviously sending so many teams, people say that's the best conference. But do you think the Big 12 kind of sends that reminder in the tournament of why they're the best conference?
I think if anything, the Big 10 sends that message for them and loses like 8 teams in the first 2 rounds.
Again?
I mean, literally, look at who they're sending. Like, you don't have. I mean, who's the best team you've got there? You've got Purdue that plays in style of play that is very susceptible to an upset. I mean, certainly I think Yale won't be an issue, but then you get to Texas, Virginia Tech. Those are 2 contrasting styles, and neither of which I think Purdue are going to be favored by that much against. You've got a team like Michigan, which I expect to be an early out. I don't think they're tournament quality. You've got Wisconsin that's got to hurt Johnny Davis. You've got Illinois, which is facing a Chattanooga team that's very strong. I mean, like, you go down the list, I'm like, is there
with former Big 12 or Silvio De Souza?
Yeah, I mean, that Chattanooga team is low-key pretty stacked. And like they've got a lot of athleticism as well. But that's kind of a different discussion for a different day. But like the Big Ten in general has so many rough matchups or teams that aren't really that good that are in the tournament that like they're setting themselves up for failure. And I think the Big 12, like, I mean, there's the possibility that you send 3 teams to the Final Four. Is it going to happen? Probably not. Like, the odds are not in your favor. But I mean, you've certainly got. It would not surprise me in the slightest to have 3 teams in the Elite Eight, and I mean, at that point, you can't really argue who the best conference is because you add that to a conference that really had no quad one road losses and 8 teams that could have made the tournament had everything gone their way throughout the season. Like, I mean, I just think that the Big Ten, really the only crutch that they have to stand on is the depth, and that's not going to mean all that much when everyone loses in the first round, and you've still got teams like Minnesota and Northwestern out there.
Fighting words from Emory Lyda. All right, Emory, tell everybody where they can find you, all of your work and its variety.
All right, so you can follow me on Twitter at Eraser41. Again, listen to any sort of Texas Tech or F1 or anything like that. Any
F1.
of those things.
Are you an
Yeah,
F1 guy?
big racing guy.
Really? Who's your driver?
Yeah.
Have we talked this before? Or
Yeah,
no?
we've talked about this before. I'm a big Leclerc guy, and as well as
yeah.
Pierre Gasly.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Eraser41. You can follow the Locked On Texas Tech podcast at Locked On TTU. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe wherever you get feeds. We've produced content every day, and we're looking forward to really ramping everything up in March and getting you ready for the first round matchup against Montana State.
All right, you guys can find me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. You guys can find the show at LO Big 12 on Twitter. You can find it wherever you guys get your podcasts and also on YouTube as well. Emory, appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.